Okay, so we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. We were talking about PG-13 things right before we so,
Well, you exposing me so.
Don't do it.
we'll get into that later or never again. Either one. Okay. So today is our Bashment Book Club live show for Cereus Blooms at Night. Before we get into the book, I just want my co-hosts to introduce themselves. Paige.
You go first. Okay, I guess I'm going first. Hey everybody, I'm Paige. I'm from Minimal Bookie, and yeah, I'm from Barbados. If you haven't been here before, and that's why I'm part of this here group.
I'm Linnell. I'm the weekend reader, and I'm from the U.S. Virgin Islands.
And I'm Sajid from the channel Books on My Social Life, and I hope that you already knew that. Great. So the book that we are discussing today is Cereus Blooms at Night. This is a book by a Trinidadian author, Shani Mutu, and it is set in a fictional Caribbean island that is very inspired by Trinidad. The name of the island is Lantanacamera. I think that's the name, but it's a very long name, and it took me a while to get it. And essentially, we're following the story of a woman named Mala Ramchandin who has had a very, very tumultuous past. And her story is told through the perspective of Tyler, a nurse that works in the nursing home, and he is caring for Mala. So as we read the book, we get to learn more about Tyler and Mala and about her past and how that has come to shape her as a person today. So the first question that I have for everybody is, what were your overall thoughts on the book?
I think both me and Linnell finished it today. Yeah. Yeah, you finished it a long time ago. You were way ahead of us for this book club. But I thought it was so beautifully written. Like the copy that I have from Canada tells you like all the awards that it was like longlisted for and nominated, and you can tell why, because of, I didn't realize the conceit of it, because it's written from the perspective of Tyler, and he's like writing it in hopes that people who are related to Mala like sees like her story and learns what happens to her. And the fact that her sister ends up in Canada and this book was like published in Canada because it had to be for some of the awards, that was just like so beautifully done. As soon as I read that last chapter, I was like, holy shit. So like, I'm a huge fan of this book. I thought it was beautiful. It was very sad, very heavy, but just beautifully done. And I'm like, I want to read more of Shani Mutu's stuff now, because I'm like, you are clearly a masterful writer.
She is.
Linnell?
Linnell's
like, I'm ready to burst bubble.
Linnell was lamenting.
So I would say that overall, I'm still unpacking the book, because it's not the writing that made me dislike the book. It's the story around Mala and how easy it is to be victimized over and over for years. And in my opinion, a community knows about it and turns a blind eye. So I think like I'm still grappling with like how hard this story was. And that is maybe shading how I'm feeling about the book, because I agree. It reminds me of like stories that I would hear about, other people, back home. So the writing felt very familiar. And I thought it was really interesting because the writing feels like how we tell stories. It's not like start to finish. It's like start and then, you pull in a little bit of piece of information and then you pick back up where you left off. And so I thought like it felt familiar, but the book might have ended up on one side of the room a couple of times.
I don't blame you, because I have a lot of friends who read this book, and the general consensus for a lot of people, and with a lot of Shani Mutu books, because a lot of her books tend to be sad, and it's like, I loved it, but I hate it. Like, it's a good story, but what happened in the story is just such a huge injustice, and it feels so, mortifying and traumatic that it's difficult to say. How do you say that you enjoyed the book? You know? So it's a really interesting. It's one of those stories, I think.
Yeah. And to me, there was a point where, not to spoil it for anybody, Yvette, hello, but
Hi,
her
Yvette.
falling in love with Ambrose while she's going through this, I was like, how is this happening? These two things can exist, but I think that's the beauty of the storytelling, right? Like she was at that point, she was still hopeful, and then so
Yeah. I feel like this story, because it feels both like a slice of life story, but also it's like this grand overarching narrative of like this, like all the things that happened in the past that resulted in this woman's life being as tragic as it was. So sort of like intergenerational trauma, because we see what happened with her father in the beginning, him being taken away to missionary school and how that impacted him. But I had a question, like, do you think him being taken away was part of the reasoning for how he, like the person he became later on, and how he ended up, trigger warning, abusing his children because his wife left him? Like, do you think he was always going to be this person?
Yes.
Regardless? Like, do you think it was a result of his upbringing? That was like a...
Yeah, I definitely felt like his backstory felt like there was a lot of self-hatred, whether it was how he looked, how he talked, where he came from. And so I assumed that he was going to take it out on Sarah, and I did not see it coming, what he did to Mala. So, but I think there was room for him to assert his power over whoever was ending up in his life, if it wasn't Lavinia.
Yeah, I agree. I think it definitely shaped him in many ways. But I think what really triggered him off was that he was in love with Lavinia, and she did that to him. She ran away with his wife. Like, that's a real boss bitch move. But like, he ran away with his wife, and so you could imagine how that made him feel. But like, a man at that time, to deal with something like that, that would often lead to men feeling like you were stripped of the power that you felt entitled to. And I think the missionary, his background in the missionary environment kind of trained him to understand that you are a man, you are entitled to power, you are entitled to this type of lifestyle with this type of family. And then when he ended up didn't getting the things that he wanted, right, the people to easily take, project that desire for power onto would be the two most vulnerable people he had access to, which were unfortunately his daughters. And that's kind of related to another question that I wanted to ask you all, because this book really delves into the history of a certain aspect of the Indo-Trinidadian community, and that is the missionary movement. So we need to talk about this, but I love how she called Canada the shivering northern wetland. I love how like literally, like it's, and people so in this book, right, Canada is not Canada, it is the shivering northern wetlands, and people from the shivering northern wetlands are wetlandish, which I just found to be so funny. But it was an actual history that happened where I think at that point in time indentureship had ended, and there was this movement to come from Canada, a Christian movement, to convert Indians specifically in Trinidad, because most Black people were already Christian. So they wanted to target Indians, most of whom would have been Hindu and Muslim, to convert to Christianity. And I wanted to ask you what were your opinions of like that first 100 pages where we got to see that exploration of like a Christian missionary movement from Canada in like the Caribbean.
It was my first time really like reading it in a fiction setting, and I thought it was very interesting to see some of the things that I've learned about like the way Indigenous peoples in Canada were treated by people, like tried to be converted into Western culture and that kind of stuff, like mirrored in the Caribbean, especially because in Barbados we didn't have like a similar situation, obviously, so it's a different history I'm learning about. It was interesting how she used that also to set up, like, I can't remember what's his name, the dad. It was similar to his
Chandon.
Chandon, yes. Yeah. So it was interesting that she used that to set up both history, so you understood what was happening and like the culture at play, but also to make him like more not sympathetic, but where you understood where he was coming from. She didn't shy away from making sure every character you saw like the humanity in them and like the situations that they went through, even though we didn't agree with what he did later. I was really interested that he was literally taken and was raised in a different household, which was very similar to things that have happened here in Canada. So I was confused about his parents, like the fact that they were expected to convert, but nothing happened when they didn't convert. I was confused by that because I thought something would have happened there. I thought there would have been like consequences or something because he was like the first chosen person. But it was interesting to see also Sarah's side of things and how she was also in
like
a situation. I was wondering about everybody else at the school. Like, were they all taken, or were they allowed to be raised by their family? What like was his situation?
I'm not exactly, because it's been a couple months since I read the book. But I also don't really know too much about that particular history. It's something that I still have to read up a little bit more about. But I think it wasn't much of a forced thing because this was after slavery and stuff. So at this point, yes, there was still a lot of racism, and Indian people did not have the kind of power that white people in the colony had at the time. But there was still like a level of, okay, nobody is slaves anymore, nobody is owned by anybody anymore. So there was a level of choice, I think, in the Indian people sort of leaving to go and convert and all that kind of stuff. And I think with Chandon, he went by choice because I think he saw opportunities to
have a better life,
because he came from a village, a lower class village, and there was this kind of so I think he wanted to get away from what he perceived as like maybe a backward lifestyle, and pursue what he was taught, because the general consensus back then was that the white Christian lifestyle was the proper lifestyle that could get you where you needed to go. So I think for him, he sort of sacrificed his family and his home life and was like, I want to go live with these people. And then they became his parents, and Lavinia became his foster sister. And it was just, Yeah,
there's like one line specifically. I think it's when Tyler is asking one of his grandmas about like the situation with Mala and like what her history is. And the grandma was saying like, like the slaves, they had like these commissions and stuff, like the freed people had commissions and stuff after they were enslaved to take care of them, make sure they were getting reparation, like this kind of stuff. But who was looking after everybody else in the community? And that's why they were being targeted by the missionaries, because nobody was looking after them, and that's what made them vulnerable. And I thought that was really interesting because I'd never heard about that perspective. So yeah, that really stood out to me when I was reading.
And I think it was early in part 1 too. It kind of sets up this division between the newly freed slave and this community, because I can't remember who was talking, but they were like, I would convert because, the slaves are getting taken care of. Our people need to get taken care of too. So I thought it was an interesting kind of like duality, how Christianity again weaponized to separate people. If you don't live this way, then you can't have this certain life. And I think I'm reading Caste with Jordan, and it made me immediately think about like the caste systems. Like if you're in the lower class, in order to move out of it, you have to do these certain things, and most times it's assimilation. But I thought what was beautifully done was how the pastor, right, is preaching how to have like a humble and this certain lifestyle, but his house was this lavish, with chandeliers and all of these opulent pieces. So it's like contradictory of how, you need to have this pious life, but you're also, you're living like this overabundant life. And so I wondered though, if whatever Thorley, the pastor, if there was like some abuse with the wife, because she seemed to be super rigid in the story. And I was like, oh, I wonder if there's like some backstory there. But to answer your question, I thought it was interesting again how we see Christianity in the form of missionary work did more harm than good.
Yeah, and it's a really interesting history as well, because it's a little different, because it's with the Indians first of all, and also it's a missionary movement that came out of Canada specifically. And I always found that to be very, very interesting because you don't usually hear much about like Canada and its history with the Caribbean. You always
Yeah.
hear about Europe and the States, right? So it was a very interesting perspective.
But isn't that another way for the queen to have like control over colonies that,
Yeah,
tangentially?
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and Trinidad was still a colony back then,
Mm,
right? So that means Canada, who was with, is connected to England, they would have had that access
mm,
facilitated for them.
And it
So
also like gives some insight as well because there's huge Caribbean communities in Canada, like in Toronto
mhm,
specifically. There's like neighborhoods that are like directly like Little Jamaica and stuff. So it like
mm,
gives some backstory into how like these communities have formed and why we all congregate in Canada of
mhm.
all places. Like that was another interesting like mirror that I didn't expect to see.
Yeah, well,
yeah,
the
like
last time I was in Canada, I went to Carnival. It was like
Yeah,
so
we have Caravana,
out
which
of
is
place for me.
yeah.
But yeah.
when I went to Canada, when I went to Toronto, I was like, oh, this is a cold Guyana because my mom's
Wow.
dad, side of the family is Guyanese, so I was just
Ooh.
meeting all of his family, and I'm like, oh wow, this is
Yeah.
like Guyana but cold. So it's very interesting, and
Mhm.
especially how you mentioned that too, like because we saw, all of them leaving to go to the shivering northern wetlands,
Mhm,
and at the beginning of the book, I thought the shivering northern wetlands was like all the white countries, like Europe, Canada,
Mm.
America, everywhere. But then
I
when I
thought
saw
it was
that
a
they were
close by
differentiated,
island.
was that
I thought it was a close by island.
really?
Yeah,
Oh wow! Oh wow! I
yeah.
didn't know it. And then they mentioned Europe, and I'm like, why would they mention Europe and then shivering northern
Mhm,
wetlands? I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, maybe. Then when I really thought about it, oh, this is about the Presbyterian
mhm.
conversion movement or whatever, which came out of Canada. So that was a really interesting thing. And Shani Motu is based in Canada right now, so Canada always seeps into her work, all of her books really. So that was an
Going
interesting.
back to the question, I thought that they were particularly targeting boys. Um, so it could, replicate like you indoctrinate the boys, they marry and pick certain girls, and that's how the tradition or the culture would move on. To your point, because I feel like Sarah was the only girl from the community at the school. But then I think he was making fun of like some other boys that came in later behind him.
Yeah,
So
and then
I,
remember too, like a lot of those Christian training thing, they would only target boys because only boys could reach a certain rank.
mhm.
Only men could reach a certain rank within like those kind of religious frameworks. So one thing we were talking about in the chat, and it was kind of related to the scene with Tyler's grandmother as well, and that is the way in which we kind of, Linnell, you were talking about how we kind of excuse men who are perceived as pious and we allow them to get away with things. And when you said that, I immediately remember the conversation with the grandmother because you reminded me about the conversation and how the grandmother knew about what was happening,
Mhm.
but she was calling it like she was almost implying like it was just incest, like the father and the
Mhm.
daughter.
Yeah.
And she didn't really like specify that it was rape, like he was taking advantage of her. So it's interesting because people knew about it, but they didn't perceive it as the father taking advantage of the daughters, right? They more
Mhm.
perceived of it as them having almost kind of like a
Relationship.
yeah, like a
Mhm.
relationship. And it really struck me because it kind of spoke to how, victims of sexual assault, especially women, are not perceived as victims. They're perceived
Mhm.
as, asking for it, wanting it, and so her situation was decontextualized. Like they were unable to recognize that. So I wanted to know what were your thoughts on that aspect of the story as well.
I feel like she really explored like female like in like the fact that they had like lack of power, like the word is not coming to me right now, but because like Sarah gets married just because he says he wants to marry her, like she doesn't get a say
Mhm.
in any of it. So
Mhm.
like in different aspects of the book, she keeps coming back to the idea like women at this time had no power and they were victim to like especially like toxic masculinity and the fact that men felt like they had power over women at this time because there were no consequences to anything that happened. Just looking at her as an older woman as well, the way she's treated and like mistreated as an elder, like there's no respect for her because she's just this crazy old woman that everybody is scared of. And like that is definitely something I've also just seen like in culture in general. If there's a woman that people don't understand, you'll tell you to stay away from her and label her as like she's not right in the head and like everything that they would say about her. Yeah.
Or she's a witch, or she will do something to you, eat your brains, or come catch you in the middle of the night if you don't behave. But to your point, Paige, even Elsie, Ambrose's wife, she knew her husband had like an emotional attachment to someone. And after a while, she stopped fighting and was like, let me help you pack up the provisions. So none of the women in this story were free, with the exception of Lavinia, right?
The one white
None
woman.
of them were the one white woman, right? None of them were able to live out their life in the way that they wanted to or needed to. And I guess Asha eventually, right? Because she ran away, but then she was in servitude for a good portion of the time she went away. But I think the part that really I think I struggled with was everybody knew, the market people knew, the school teachers knew, but nobody intervened. And there's a scene in the end when the parishioner, the police chief came and he was like, oh, we're checking on you. And then she like lets off on him like, nobody checked on me all this time. Now you're coming to bother me. And that part, I was like, okay, I have to put the book down for a minute, because it's not like it was a secret. It was like plain view. And I'm sure there would have been conversations like, oh, of course she wanted it because she stayed. She could have run away like her mother. But the fact that she was taking into consideration her sister for a long portion of that time. And then she was afraid, like, where was she going to go? She didn't finish school. She had limited, skills. I mean, she's surviving, so she's definitely resourceful. And so I just felt like her madness, it felt like it was like a steaming pot that boiled over to the end, and it made like everything came full circle in part 4.
Yeah.
But I hate Chandon.
And the thing is, like, at first I was very neutral about it.
Nobody can redeem him for me, not even Jesus Christ. He is not redeemable for me.
At first I was very neutral about him because I was like, okay, he seems like a man of the time. And then when that happened, I was like, wow. And what really struck me about this story, and from a lot of people, who talked about this story with me, the general consensus is that nobody helped Mala. Nobody wanted to intervene. And part of it was also the perception, like we were talking about, Paige, like how I said, instead of like judging people, we could be doing so much better if we actually help them and try to understand them. Nobody tried to understand Mala. She was always antagonized from the very beginning. From the very beginning, they just thought that she was, a hot girl doing things with her father, right? And then after that, they just saw her as like a crazy old woman rather than a young girl who has been through so much trauma. And that leads me to another thing I wanted to ask you all about, and that was so at the beginning of the book, her name was Popo, which was her childhood nickname. And then when she became a woman, she dropped that nickname. But coming down closer to the, I guess in the middle of the story, kind of closer to the end, she would envision Popo a lot. So she would invoke Popo, which was like her childhood self. And it was in this strange way where she needed to protect her, if that makes sense. So I wanted to know what you all thought of like that, because I found like it got a little, I don't want to say speculative, but it had an almost fabulous vibe to it sometimes, that she envisioned or kind of created like this imaginary younger version of herself.
I think that's the beauty of the writing in this harshness, right? Like the part that when she was Popo, I think we were we were supposed to see it from a child's perspective. Like she was still able to see like the beauty in saving the snails and the animals. Like she in that time period was still protected in some ways. And I oh that part when she's like, "Don't call me that anymore," gave me such chills, because it's now attached to a very visceral experience, right? And so I thought it was really smart to frame it as such a traumatic experience that is happening over and over. Your brain fractures, right, in order to protect yourself. Without getting into much in the weeds, like that happens, right? It's a coping strategy to survive. So you disassociate and you go back to a memory that you feel the most safe. And it was pre-popo, like it was school popo. It wasn't popo during the assault. It's when she was running free in the neighborhood. So I thought it was like really, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. So it was done really well. I'm still mad though. Still very mad. Ugh.
Yeah, I feel like because I've been watching Blind Manor on and off, I watched an episode today which was very non-linear in its storytelling as well. Like you go in between all these different scenes with the same person and they don't know quite how they're experiencing time. And that part really reminded me of the episode I just watched. And I felt like part of it was part of her childhood that she was still holding on to, like that innocence that she wanted to protect, that she wanted somebody to protect. She was protecting it in herself. And the reason we see like Popo fly away when the body is discovered is like finally there's some peace to this story. Like that was, oh my God, just thinking about it, I'm just like,
Yeah.
beautiful. So
I think if you were reading too fast, you might not have gotten that connection that, because there's another part where the birds come up, right? And she's protecting a bird. And then the symbolism of her saying, "Go fly away, Popo," it's like she's letting it go. So I was just like, oh, this is too much.
Yeah.
Too much.
Especially because at the end she's with Ambrose and they're like sitting on the bench and she like points at the birds and she says like the Popo thing and I'm just like, oh my God, this is too much for my brain. Like I can't do this. But yeah.
But everybody is redeemed in a sense, right? Because Walter Bosie, right, is the judge.
His name. I screamed.
Yeah,
I can't handle this.
Oh
I can't deal with it. Yeah. He wasn't really like redeemed, but the fact that he came back and like did this small thing, but it like also broke my heart that she could have gotten these letters at any point if also that mailman hadn't been judgmental and thought the place was a place of sin.
Everybody just made malice.
I know. Yeah. It was that part really was what broke me. I was like, I can't. And then he was like, Tyler was reading the letters and I was like, she at any point, her life could have turned around and been better, but it wasn't
because it would have given her hope.
Yeah,
and like it kind of I was so mad at Asha for a second because I'm like, you left after all your sister, she protected you. She protected you from your dad, like, and you just left, and it's like she didn't just leave. She, she wrote letters, and she probably figured, well, Mala doesn't care because she's not replying to the letters, so maybe I should just leave her be or something like that. And back then it wasn't like, you could like Google stuff or like fly back home. Right. Like there was so much, so much like she was probably an immigrant in shivering northern wetlands looking for her mother. She probably had a whole, bunch of obstacles there. She couldn't just fly back home to get her sister. So I kind of felt bad for Asha in the end because she probably never knew what happened.
And I thought, there's no indication of this, but I wonder if Mala stayed because she wasn't sure if Asha was going to come back and she wanted to be there if she did.
Yeah. I think she was like more so waiting for Ambrose to come back because that's like the time where the son comes to visit and she sees him for Ambrose and she's like, you're back. You finally came back. And like that bit, I feel like because what happens, we see Ambrose run away and then like you think she's expecting it, but also she's having a mental break because of everything that happened. So she doesn't know that he came back. And I'm sad all over again. It's fine.
But his dedication to her, I mean, even though it was flawed, I think, because he didn't, was it Otto that cut the flower to bring to the, okay. So his dedication to her, even though it was flawed, I mean, you gotta, I guess, give him a bit of a pass because he tried.
Yeah, I kind of was kind of salty with Ambrose in the end because I don't know if I remember correctly when I read it, but like he's like the one who causes the father's death, right? Oh, yeah. And so he just ran away and left her with the body, and she had to go hide the body in the basement and whatnot. And and I think that's also why he withered away as well, right? Because he was guilty. And I think he was in somewhat of a predicament, right? Because he knew that if he took accountability for it, he would go to jail. But he also loved Mala, but he couldn't go back to Mala because if he went back and took accountability, it could affect his life. So he just withered away and he would sleep for months or something like that. And I was just like, you should have said something. Like you were her only hope at one point.
But he had a history of running away because didn't he run away when they were playing that game?
Yeah, he ran away.
He always took the easy way. I mean, but he did burn down the house in the end, or
it was his son.
That, on the house. We're just spoiling it for everybody. I'm sorry.
I mean, you would expect it if we're having a book discussion.
Yeah, that's kind of like the general thing with these live shows.
But this time you're not gonna leave Sajid and pretend that you turned the volume down. But it isn't.
Yeah, I made Sean read that. I read this book very early. One thing that I found interesting, like, oh my god, there's so much things to talk about with this book, right? But I love the way that she wrote about nature. Like, I mean, the book as a whole is beautifully written, but like the description of like from the trees and the plants and the animal, and from the live things to the dead things, right? Because we had the basement where she would carry the dead. Yeah, she would carry the dead animals, lizards, bugs, whatever, and let them decompose. And just the description of everything, even the things that were more macabre, I found to be beautiful. Like it had a really just very intense beauty to it. And I don't know, and especially the night where she was like waiting for the Cereus to bloom, like it was so pretty. It was so pretty.
But that goes back to your point earlier where it landed on like the fantastical part, I thought, because you don't have this flower because it's ugly when it's not blooming, but it has like all of these different components. It's big, it's beautiful, it's fragrant, but it only shines one time. So you have to be patient. You have to take care of it. So like there's all of these like metaphorical pieces to how, it's like the darkness, right, that she's experiencing, but she could still see the beauty in nature. And, that whole mysticism piece there too. But I also thought that, isn't it like cyclical, like things that are beautiful die unless you cultivate pieces of it? Like maybe I'm stretching, but I was thinking about like, what is the tie-in with this flower? What is it about this flower that is like such essential to the story?
I think she's the flower. She blooms at one time with Ambrose. That's the one moment of like true proper happiness we get in this book, and then she wilts immediately afterward. Like that is what I thought. Yeah, I was like,
that's good,
so beautiful. I'm telling you, I'm obsessed with this author. The writing is just
I'm gonna change
so much to unpack. Yeah. And like that she's so attached to nature as well, because like she's represented by this nature, and therefore she communes with it and she understands it, especially when she steps away from like the humanity and like the ugliness of all of that, and then she's just left with the nature.
Yeah. I mean, I love
that's good.
I love that. I kind of that's spot on page. Like I think you got it.
Thank you.
Along the same lines, it was more just along the lines of like it's ugly or neutral, or like people don't really like the plant, but you judge that plant for what you see on the outside. But if you actually really as you were saying, Linnell took the time to care for
Yeah.
it and have patience, you could actually kind of see what really lies beneath. And I think that's what Tyler did. He was the only person who
Mhm.
waited for the Cereus to bloom, right? He took interest in Mala when nobody else would, right? And he was the one who unearthed her story. He was the one who had patience with her silence. She wasn't talking to anybody, and he waited until she slowly but surely bloomed for him in a
Mhm.
way, until he could
Mm-hmm.
actually see the truth, right? And he could actually see that, well, this is not some just random crazy woman who killed her father. This is a woman with a tumultuous history and who had a chance of, you know, having a regular life, had things not, traumatized her and took that away from her. So like that's kind of what I saw it as too. But I think that interpretation page is also really spot on.
Yeah, I
I like.
like your interpretation.
I'm glad that my degree in English has finally come to use in this one moment in my life.
How did
But
you use your degree? Well, one live show on YouTube a couple of years ago.
Very
Our
2020.
imagery.
but one question I had, I feel like we were getting bits and pieces about Tyler's struggle, and then after I think like part 3, his
Yeah.
story just melds away.
That was another thing I was going to. I had a question here. I felt like as much as I loved this story, I think that a lot of the characters, especially Tyler, we didn't really get to see things come full circle for them because in the beginning he had a really strong presence, right?
Mhm.
And it was very first person because he was in the story, and I thought, well, okay, we'll be fluctuating between the past and the present, but after a while we just remained in the past and we didn't really
Mhm.
go back to Tyler until the end. And I felt like it was almost the same thing with Otto as
Mhm.
well. um, uh, I found Otto's character to be so interesting. And this ties in with another question, which is the treatment of gay and trans people in the story. Otto was a trans character. He was born assigned female, but he transitioned in a really weird way, in the sense that this was a time where that wasn't a thing. But like, he transitioned in such a way where people just didn't really notice or care. And I almost found it to be almost kind of again like mystical or magical in a way, because I couldn't believe that these people would have a boy, or a girl, sorry, and the neighborhood would know that the family, Ambrose, the Mohanty family had a girl, and then suddenly the Mohanty girl became the Mohanty boy, and nobody really questioned it, nobody really talked about it. The parents, that was written in a way where like the parents I think forgot.
Yeah.
So
Until the end, the mom was like, I know I
My
bought.
mom knew the entire time and
Yeah,
was like,
but-
I've been taking care to think about what your life is going to be like. You have to be
Yeah.
careful about who you marry. Like, please take care. So that there's the one thing I liked about it was I don't think there was violence against anybody
Mhm.
who was queer in this, which was refreshing as hell, I must say. That was
There was
very
that
relieving.
one exchange in the garden where somebody was like, I'm not funny or something like that. But you're right, there wasn't
Like,
any
there wasn't
violence.
any overt violence compared to
Yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
other books we've read, which was I feel like she was very respectful with the way she like was talking about a lot of this stuff, and because we're seeing it from Mala's perspective, and she's such a kind and accepting person, just like gentle with everyone, that we just saw acceptance, and I really appreciated like that aspect of this book. There was one paragraph which was kind of weird to me, about Otto, where they would say he and then in parentheses she. I didn't really enjoy like that aspect because it was sort of like emphasizing like the fact that Otto was trans, like this was a girl, this was like that sort of like element of it I did not appreciate. But everything else about it, like the way it was almost mystical, reminded me of Shauna McGuire's, I can't remember what the name of the series is, Wayward Children or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
That story
Jack?
where,
Or
no,
Yeah.
it wasn't Jack and Jill were the kids.
Twins.
There was another
Yeah.
character. Yeah.
Okay.
It sort of reminded me of that element where it was like sort of fantastical, but like because we're in like a fantastical Caribbean country, like you just accept and move on with the story.
I
You
was
see,
so
that's
yeah, no, I was just gonna say that I found it interesting. Like, I wondered if it was something where like only the mother knew, or she kept it a secret. But like the only thing that didn't really like make sense to me was like, like clearly homophobia was a thing, right? Because people didn't like Tyler, and sexism was a thing, right? But it was just strange how everybody just let the whole this character transitioned, right? Kind
Mm-hmm.
of passed under the radar. So I was wondering, like, was it a secret and I just didn't read it properly, or like, was that more of a fantastical element of the story? That was something I couldn't really make sense of when I was reading it.
I thought that's so. I didn't think Otto was trans. I thought he's intersex because there's a part where the doctor says I made a mistake, right? Did I make that up?
No, but I think they were just like, it was part of like the whole like everybody forgot
Yeah,
that
okay.
Otto was born Ambrosia. But
Yes.
like I feel like that was just like her fantastical storytelling element of it. I feel like we aren't supposed to take it too literally that people forgot, but maybe that like because so much was happening at that time and there was other focuses that people didn't really pay attention. And
Then
so like
the
it did happen.
But the mom says there's a community, right? Like towards the end for people like you. So make sure that when you choose, was it Mave, Mori, the
It does
young,
begin with the girl that liked
yeah,
Otto.
yeah.
I
So
remember.
make sure if you want to be with whoever, make sure that that's right. So I thought like maybe that's again, my interpretation could have been wrong, that maybe there was an intersex community, or maybe a trans community that she, was like, make sure that
Right.
you're picking someone who knows who you are, so then there's no question about them loving you. And I think in that too, there was like some sadness because um Otto felt like he had to hide himself, but in at the same time, his mother was rooting for him in the only way she knew how to, by not saying anything, rather than saying like because nobody ever said I love you, you know, I'm rooting for you, right? Until that end part where she's just like, but it had to be in the confines of heteronormative, go get married so you could have the life that you want. But I also thought that Tyler and Otto were going to get together. And so, my romance, eyes were like,
Yeah.
and
And that's
then
what
it
I
didn't
felt.
happen.
That's what I felt, and that's what, going back to the original question that I asked you, like, how did you feel about like Tyler's story and stuff not really coming full circle? Because I felt like we got like 10 pages, 50 pages, and where we got to see Tyler again. But I felt like if we had like a little extra 30, 40 pages to kind of wrap things up and see where things would have gone with him and Otto, and how I didn't really get a sense of how did Mala's story impact him in the end. Like, we get that he was interested, but like, how did it pay off for him in the end? So what did y'all think about that?
Yeah, I think we were just supposed to assume. Yeah, I feel like we were just supposed to assume that because we're getting Mala's for full story, that by that point he's really opened up to her as well, and therefore he's come to his own realization. Just as she was able to let go of the things that were haunting her, we're supposed to assume that he's come to that off the pages, especially because she sort of writes it in that we're not getting any more of Tyler, because he says like things are happening with me and Otto, but I'm not going to write about that because that's not Mala's story. And then like I just was like, okay, I guess this is the end of this for me, and I'll do like a little bit at the end. So like I don't really like. It was unsatisfying in the sense that I wish we'd gotten more of Tyler, but like also there's only so much the author could have done with the story. I feel like another 40 pages might have made it too much. Like I don't know where she would have put it in. Maybe in betweens of like the sections where we learn a little bit more about the history, there could have been more intro with Tyler, but it might have been like too long as well. But
I thought by the end of the book I was definitely tired. I took a
lot of it today, and that might be part of it.
Huh?
You did read a lot of it today, and that might be part of it.
It's an intense read. It took me a while to read it too, so maybe that's why as well. But I do recall that part where, because he kind of writes like a letter at the beginning of each part, right, to address the reader, and he probably said something along the line, like as you said, like he did say that he's not going to be focusing on himself anymore at some point. But I guess I just kind of wished that I could have seen a little bit more of him.
I really liked him. He reminded me of like some people that I knew, like growing up. I was like, I wish like there was a book about you, because you probably have like a very interesting story that I would want to read about.
Yeah, and I think that, over time, because of the care and concern that he showed for Mala, like he became less of an oddity and people started to actually treat him like a human being. I thought it was like really sweet. Was it Mr. Hector,
Yeah,
Mr.
the governor.
Yeah, and I thought that was really sweet that, he shared that part about his brother and he wished that his brother had the same opportunity. And so, I'm hoping that Tyler had a happy ending. But by part three, I was just like, we not getting any more Tyler. It's all Mala.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, it's just I appreciated that, and I'm glad we kind of like reclarified that because every time I think about the book, I'm like, God, I wish we had more Tyler. But now when I look
Mhm.
at it from that perspective, I can kind of see because like I think I forget that he was narrating the whole story, right?
Yeah,
He
yeah.
was in control of what he wanted to share, and I guess at some point he was probably like, I think I gave you enough of me. Let's talk
Mhm.
about Nala now. And perhaps and that leads to another question that I wanted to ask, right? Perhaps that is connected with the fact that Shani Mutu is not a very conventional storyteller. And this
Mhm.
is something
Mhm.
that I know because I read 3 of her books now, and her books are very non-linear, very all over the place. We get random perspectives from other characters every now and again. It's like she's almost breaking the rubric because I'm
Mhm.
so used to reading, like, if you read a YA novel where it's like 2 characters narrating, you don't break that rubric. You don't get like 2, 3 chapters from the perspective of another character. But I feel like Shani was just like, fuck it, I'll write whatever I want in whatever order I want it, and y'all will just read the story. So perhaps it's because I'm so used to that rubric. This kind of story where it's like we start in the beginning, we start like at the end, after
Mhm.
everything happened, and then we go back to like her childhood, and then from her childhood we go back to her older years, and then we go back to her teenage years after that. So what did y'all think about the actual like storytelling itself and the structure and organization of the story?
There was one point where I wanted to know what happened with Ambrose and Mala. Like I wanted to know what was the tea there, like how did she push him away, because he mentions that later on. But it was like when you read that section you understand why she left it for last, just because like even though it's non-linear storytelling, overall when you read the full story you understand she meant it to be cyclical, even if like the
Mhm.
storytelling itself, like the things that were happening were out of order.
Mhm.
And so like I feel like I've been reading a lot more non-linear stories because I read Son of a Trickster recently by Eden Robinson, and it's a very similar style where it's told like almost from memory, like because it's from memory in this book specifically, and you're like remembering certain things and then you're going on little
Mhm.
rambles of stuff like you would if you were telling the story in person. And like I feel
Mhm.
like that's like trying to like decolonize storytelling because we've
Mhm.
been taught how to tell a story a certain way, like reading stories like this from
Yeah.
many, like, oh, actually, there's so much you can play with, and it makes the story 10 times better and more interesting. And yeah, so I really enjoyed the way this challenged me to pay
Yeah.
attention and keep track of everything so I could fully understand what was happening.
I like how
Yeah, and
you
I think
decolonize. Sorry, I like how you said decolonize this story because I remember I said like it's kind of like a rubric. There's kind of like you'd perceive like as a reader that there are certain rules that a
Mhm.
writer must abide by when they're telling a specific type of story. But this is almost just like, well, this is a Caribbean story. I'm gonna tell it the Caribbean way, which, as we said in the beginning, is kind of non-linear. And I like how you point out too, like the real climax of the story is knowing how the father died, but the father
Mhm.
died like at the middle of their lives, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, how did she? So it actually makes sense when you really think about it like that. Sorry, Linnell, you were going to say.
No, I was just going to say that I think if this story was told linearly, it wouldn't have had the same impact because we get dropped in certain points in her life. If we had just gotten to the end, it wouldn't have had such a, like, my opinion, such a like a visceral reaction to the story, because there's parts where it's like, oh, she's still a little girl, so you're latching on to that, and then 2 pages later something horrible happens to her, and then you go back to her as an adult in the house. And so I feel like it was like these almost milestones to add to the madness, right? And then the ending with the, well, how did she get the matches in the first place? Well, it wasn't, what I mean? Like it,
Mhm.
it just made these like points over time that if it was linear, I think it would have lost some of the, you know, I don't want to say power because that's not the right word, but it wouldn't have been such of a gut punch to you.
Yeah, the impact, And I feel like part of it as well is sometimes you think like at the end when you read everything and you understand like Ambrose was really into like the nature element of it, and that's why she was like had all these things, like she had all these plants because he was bringing plants to her and stuff, like the things that felt illogical because you didn't understand what was happening or like the root of it. When you learn it, you go back and you're like, oh my god, all of this is like extra layers to every single thing. So if you reread it, you have more like context and you're able to enjoy it in a different way. Probably, I'm definitely going to try to reread this soon, just so I can like compare with the knowledge.
And going back to your point, Sajid, like the nature piece was always like their love language. Like that was always the way they communicated with each other, right? And like we knew what the snails meant, right? No one else knew what that meant but those two. So I think like, if you had that in the beginning, like it might not have made sense. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that was their love language in general in the story, because Lavinia was the one who really started this whole thing, because she kind of became like a stepmom figure in a way, right?
I loved that whole
oh my god, I just kind of wish that this was a short story instead of a novel, and it ended with like them taking the two girls. If they had just taken the two freaking girls, oh my god. And all because Mala wanted to go back and get
the flower. No, she wanted to get the flower. She cut like a stem off and she was going to bring it with her. And she forgot the bag upstairs and she was going back for it.
Yeah, and it's like,
but I was hoping that the mom would have come back,
I think it was written in such a way where like she couldn't, because, and then I had a question here too, like what do you all think happened to Lavinia and Sarah? Because I kept thinking to myself, like, why are they not coming back? But I had to keep reminding myself, like, if they didn't leave when they left, the father would have stopped them, right? And also if they couldn't come back because it was boats, right? They didn't have any planes back then. They had to catch the boat. When they got there, she was already an outcast at that point. Everybody thought she was, they're lesbians, they're evil, whatnot, they're corrupt. If they came back, the village would have like just completely shut them out. So there wasn't really any avenues for them to come back. But to answer the question, like I don't think they would have had a super happy life in the shivering northern wetlands, because I think that Sarah would have been haunted by the fact that she lost her.
Yeah, absolutely. But to me, though, Lavinia had enough resources. Even if they didn't come back, they could have sent somebody to come back for the kids, right? Because clearly she did some work on her end to set them up to be able to leave that day. And it wasn't like she hadn't left, like she had roots somewhere else. So I'm sure she could have come back. So in my cold heart, I hope that Sarah resented her and hated her and they never had like a successful relationship.
I think that they probably had a harder life than we think they did, because I don't think Sarah's family would have let her keep her inheritance. She came from a very religious family. They probably cut her the fuck off when they found out that she ran away with the woman. I
hope she took that money and ran.
I think she probably took some of it, but she probably didn't get as much as she thought she was gonna. Like, I think they probably definitely faced some difficulties, and that's probably also why Sarah couldn't find a way to like how Ash was able to communicate. Like, why was Sarah not able to communicate? Something had to have happened there. Like, she could have easily done send it to this place so that he doesn't know where I am.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have the money to go there anyway. So, like, something had to have happened. I feel like I don't think she would have just abandoned them. Maybe their ship also, it was right before the rainy season. Maybe something happened to the ship and they just don't know. Like, so many things could have happened. I pray, like, my little soul wants them to have been as happy as they could have been, because I just loved them.
I loved them too, but I didn't want them to be happy, because I was like, well, if my mom ran away with somebody,
valid.
I was like, and I feel like too, in terms of speculating, like what might have happened to them, I feel like Sarah could have probably like died by suicide or something. I mean, think about it. Like, you leave your homeland, everything you knew, to live in this place where you are like one of 5 brown people, right? So racism, you're a lesbian on top of that, you're living with a woman, homophobia, right? You you were forced to abandon your children, and she didn't have control over anything. The person that might have had more control over this situation was Lavinia, right? And Lavinia was the one who told them to let the cat go, because Lavinia, that wasn't her children. Like, what Lavinia wanted was Sarah. Like, yeah, she liked the kids too, but Sarah was like, I want my girlfriend, but I also want my children. So I think Sarah would have had a very miserable life. They wouldn't have
been like able to be open anyway wherever they went, and she just wanted her kids, because like you said, they had a conversation that Mala was able to listen to because she was sitting on the steps, and like Sarah didn't want to go anywhere. She was like, until Lavinia was like, okay, we can bring the kids too, then she's like, all right, let's go. But the fact that she didn't, I feel like Lavinia took advantage of that situation, because Sarah couldn't go back for her kids without like probably dying, because we saw what happened when Mala went with Ambrose. So like, that situation was so frustrating and like heartbreaking that she kept thinking about it as well. Like every year on that day, she would have like that vivid, intense memory.
And that's when she had the break, right? Like the doorway represented everybody leaving her again, right? And so that's where she also had the breakdown where her dad had his breakdown. But man, she got him good
with the pigeon,
and I was like, chop him up.
The pigeon killed me.
I was going to ask, like, amidst all of this, terrible things that happened, what were some of the diamonds in the rough? For me, it was the pigeon. I was like, she was like, oh, you want chicken, bitch?
Rotten dead.
And ignore him when he was calling out. Yes.
So good. Oh my God. I feel like the one moment of joy was the moment where like it was Ambrose and her got the chance to like be together before the dad came home. Like that was the moment where I was like, oh my God, this is maybe. And then I was like, no, it obviously didn't happen. But like in this moment, you feel like the hope that they both feel, like they're both excited about the potential of something. I really loved that moment. And like Tyler in the beginning, how he literally didn't give a shit what anybody was saying. Like, I just love him as a character. The fact that he was so like, he was so strong in the face of all these people because he was so confident in himself was chef's kiss. Loved it.
Yeah, I think the gem for me was when she first spoke to Tyler, when she started talking. I was like, okay, so we know now that he's not going to like hurt her or, like, they have now officially created like this bond. But the second gem was when she killed her dad. I was screaming. I was like, finally!
You deserve it. But like, was it? I can't, like, sometimes when I read things, my brain doesn't compute properly. Like, was it both of them that killed him, or was it Ambrose, or?
I feel like Ambrose's like he like hit him so hard in the head with the gramophone that he was done from that point. That's what I took from it. Yeah. Well, he was like he wasn't like dead. Yeah, he wasn't dead, but he was like she finished him off. It was the end of it. She finished him off, but he was like on the ground because of Ambrose. Because she still had to like bite his hand to get the cleaver out of his hand. Like there was still a little bit of struggle.
And then she was the one who
everybody was screaming. I know that was a little dramatic.
No, that's okay. We love it when problematic men die. Like
at the hands of their victims.
At the hands of their victim, period. Like, I love that. So we went for an hour, and I think we pretty much covered a lot with regards to this book. I mean, there's so much more because this story is so layered. And as you said, Paige, it's definitely like something you need to reread over and over again. I don't know if Linnell could handle that story.
I want us to read a romance. Can we just read something gentle and soft?
Yeah, you've
been
at me
with it. Segue into.
Say what?
This is a good segue into. Sorry, I think I got disconnected a little bit. This is a good segue into announcing the next book, which is still probably going to be very dark, but it's at least genre. It's a murder mystery, but at least it's genre fiction, okay? It is The Bone Readers by Jacob Ross. So this is, I don't know if it says a literary novel on the top, but from what I heard, this is crime fiction.
Okay.
And it's by a Grenadian author set on a fictional Caribbean island, again, because Caribbean authors just love making up their own islands. So this will be our book for the next live show. We will be announcing it on our social media and stuff. So no worries. It's called The Bone Readers by Jacob Ross. And our live show will be on the, what day did we decide?
I think we said 29th of December.
Yeah, 29th.
Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
Tuesday, the 29th of December. So, you know, everybody will be all hungover from Christmas, but, you know, yeah, we'll have a wonderful Caribbean with a mystery Christmas.
And it's short, so.
It's really short. And the chapters are like 2 pages long each.
No,
so like
for me, because I'm the kind of person that can't put on this book was, okay, I will say, this book was hard because there's no chapters. So me putting down this book, I was like, I don't know where to read until, so I had to like flip forward to see where like the little indentations were like books that like separated.
Yeah.
That was hard for me.
I love that though. I love the little sketches of the
especially when you like learn why these were like the illustrations and then like you're like, oh, this makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It was great.
We need romance though.
It'll happen. We already have been talking about romance books that we could read. It'll happen. 2021 is a brighter year.
Oh, do we want to check the comments?
It was going to be that bitch, and then 2020 happened. So let's just cross our fingers for 2021.
Listen, I was supposed to go back home for Christmas, and we just hit 1,000 cases a day here. So I'm stuck in Canada for the holiday season. So
yeah, I was going to go to Mexico for Christmas, the week after Christmas, and
yeah, no.
I was supposed to have 4 trips this year. I was supposed to go to Orlando twice. I was supposed to go to New York, and I was supposed to go Guyana. And none of that happened anymore because COVID was like, hey, I want you to stay in your house all the time, which I was kind of doing before anyways, but like now more explicitly. So
at least we were doing it before, like we knew at any point we could change our mind and like go sign. No, we can't.
The most activity I have now is going to my mailbox and coming back to the house.
Thank you to Yvette. Yvette is asking Linnell if she has a YouTube channel. Linnell?
I do not. Hi, Yvette. Thank you for the comment. I don't, and I probably will never.
Blog.
But I do have a blog. That's correct. It's Weekend Reader at blogspot.com.
We just make you pull your face out.
And you can,
No, I was saying we just make you pull your face out for these live shows.
Yeah. It's so funny because I've been doing like popping up on other people's YouTube channels. Like I was on Jordan's yesterday, Left on Red, and then I was on India.
We need to bully Linnell into
literally make a BookTube channel at this point. Like,
camera. Make BookTube videos that she doesn't use the camera.
I'm sorry. I can barely keep up with my blog. I can't imagine doing YouTube on top of that. Plus, you know.
Don't worry, Yvette. We'll keep bullying her.
Yeah, we know.
Thank you so much. And there's somebody, Ardo. We love you.
Yeah, Ardo. Love you, Ardo.
Yeah. Don't read the books. Just come see us. Oh,
thank you, Danielle and Samhita. Thank you so much for coming and checking out the live show.
Wait, let me get my music.
Oh God.
Oh, please.
Did you pick a song?
I feel she can put it on shuffle, maybe.
Let's wait. Hold on. My phone is moving a little slow.
Listen, I'm feeling so embarrassed because she gonna play some popular Caribbean song that you all know.
You're not. Oh yeah, this did happen last time. We did have this conversation.
You're right. Oh, let's do this. Please.
Okay.
Okay. So that was our 5-second of music.
Our musical interlude that always ends these live shows.
But I'm so excited about the murder mystery because you know that's the genre I'm trying to get back into. So
yeah, I've been reading a lot of creepy books, so I feel like this will fit right in for me. I'm ready for it. Hopefully it is not heavy. We'll see. I'm gonna be reading a lot of romance.
Picked it, so it will be.
I met the author a couple years ago, and he's really nice.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I went to a book event that he did for a collection that he had a story in, so he's really cool. I think he's queer. So hopefully, maybe we might get a little. I don't know. I'm not jumping to that conclusion, but
as long as the queer character is not the one who's murdered.
Points are made. We will see.
We'll see.
We don't want that in our stories anymore.
Truly,
we'll see, but I think we'll like it because it's definitely a really revered book. I hear a lot of people locally talking good things about it. So we will see y'all on December 29th. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Go read Shani Mutu. Go read Caribbean Waters. Put down Sarah J. Maas. Put down Cassandra Clare. And go read Caribbean. So, okay, I should probably delete that part of the video. Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.